Welcome to the second of our Insight series, and today we're joined by Alex Morris, a huge inspiration of mine and someone I'm really looking forward to delving into. First and foremost, Alex, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule today to join us.
No problem. Happy to you, Martin.
So, first of all, I'd like to start with obviously the start of your journey, Alex, before we go into where you are now. And that was at grassroots football. And what age did you start sort of playing, and who for?
Yeah, so I started playing around about the age of 6, 7. So it was at Trubshaw Cross Lads and Dads, which I believe is still going now, in Tunstall, Stoke-on-Trent. So in my formative years, played there for, I don't know, maybe 18 months to 2 years. Loved it. Playing with my school friends. We were a good team as well, which also helps because you get used to some early successes. So yeah, that was the foundation and platform for my love in the game. So that would have been 88, 89, when football was very different. And from there, I went on to play for Stone Dominoes and Stoke City. So the two were linked at the time in terms of there was a connection between both of them. So yeah, I started to develop my love for the game initially at Trubshaw Cross, and then that led to me playing for Stone Dominoes and what was then the Stoke City Centre of Excellence.
How important, at the beginning there, you mentioned about enjoyment and fun with your mates. How important were the coaches and mentors around you in those early years? And can you remember an impact that they had on you?
Yeah, they were huge. The coach at Trubshaw Cross Lads and Dads for us was a good friend of my dad's, and his lad played for the team as well, and was a good friend of mine as well, Ray Machin. He was fantastic, had a deep love for the game and made all the players feel comfortable, made all the players feel valued, and had a real good manner about himself. So therefore you didn't just come to play the game of football to win and experience the successes that naturally everybody wants to have, but you also came knowing that you were going to have an enjoyable experience regardless of the result, and that's a real skill of a coach at any level, and Ray had that. And I think your most initial formative experiences of a coach are probably the ones that shape you as much as any, because it develops that love for the game that then once you've got it, you never let go of it, do you? I think all of us that love the game, play the game, coach the game, once you get that bug, you just can't lose it. It's there for your life, and Ray certainly gave us that as players in those formative years when I first started playing.
You mentioned you obviously went from Stone Dominoes over to the Centre of Excellence at Stoke. How did that feel, and what were the biggest sort of challenges transitioning from grassroots into a more sort of professional environment away from your friends maybe?
Yeah, I think the challenge is where you are in a routine, and routine for young children at any age when you're in primary school is often difficult to experience, because you like that freedom and that sort of innocence of childhood to follow through from your school life into your private life, but you don't get that when you join a Centre of Excellence or what is now our academy, because you are determined by routine, and you have to ensure that you commit to the environment that they're opening up for you, because otherwise you fall by the wayside. Even then, when it was a less structured system, you still had to conform, and if you didn't conform, then you were in a position where you were probably not going to go as far as you'd like in that environment. So it shaped me very early on in terms of being not just organised and structured with the way that I had to commit to my life beyond school, but also it set you into that mode of having good habits and good behaviours that can follow through in other walks of life. So yeah, the change from grassroots football into what was then Centre of Excellence football was quite significant. And then obviously from there, moving into an academy environment at Everton and Crewe that took me into my adult life was more of the same, really.
As a young player, can you remember what it was that made you stand out, and what were your sort of attributes that got you in the door at the Centre of Excellence and later on in the academies?
I think you probably have to ask other people that, because you don't really look at what makes you stand out. You just basically, as a player, and in that environment when you're younger, you just go with the flow, don't you? And intuition kicks in.
Would you say that was the almost innocence of you then as a child, not knowing and you were just enjoying the game?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And being brutally honest, back then, I think the way that players, young junior players, were viewed by scouts was probably a little different to now. I think there was less intelligence, if you like, that went into what should be the norm in terms of a player being accepted into an academy. I think if you had a skill set in one particular area of the game that stood out, then that was enough for scouts, whereas now that maybe isn't. Maybe they're looking to see if a player has a more rounded game, and if they haven't, then you're not really at the required standard, so to speak, whereas then I think, like I say, there was less intelligence around what an academy player should look like, and therefore, if you stood out in a particular facet of the game, then that was good enough. And I think mine was probably the fact that I was very athletic and versatile in terms of my impact on games, whether it be defending the goal at one end of the pitch or having an impact in terms of setting up goals at the other end. It certainly wasn't scoring goals. I've never been any good at that. So that was probably really my greatest strength, that versatility and athleticism.
Was there a point during the time at the academy of Everton and Crewe that you thought actually coaching something I want to do, or was it placed upon you, or what were the circumstances around that?
Yeah, I think you've used the right term there, placed upon me, because being honest, it probably wasn't a ambition of mine. I wanted to be a professional footballer, and that was all I was focused on. And it was, all going swimmingly, so to speak, up until the age of 19, when the injury that ultimately led to me retiring at 22, 23 originated, really. I was obviously at a club when I was at Crewe from the age of 12 to, in the end, 40, 41, that was renowned for giving youth a chance. In between Stoke and Crewe, I had a short 8-month spell at Everton, which was really beneficial and gave me a lot of good exposure to other elements of the game that I wouldn't have got everywhere else. But yeah, at Crewe, you knew that you were going to be given an opportunity if you were good enough and worked hard enough. And I got to the stage where, that came to fruition, and then injury came, and I had to think, because of the nature of the injury, about life after being a professional footballer, because it was a degenerative injury rather than an impact injury that may not have led to me going back into the game fully fit, and that's the way it transpired. So from 2021, I started to look towards taking my coaching badges, because I knew I wanted to remain in football in some capacity. And I was encouraged by Steve Holland, who is obviously a great mentor of mine, to go into coaching, because he felt I had the skill set and the capabilities and the characteristics to forge a career in that part of the game.
Thank you for sharing about your injury as well. And what would you say that you were sort of the main experience or things you learned from your transition from player to coach?
That coaching isn't easy, and that playing is. Because as a player, you just turn up at, I'm talking in a professional capacity now, but the same applies at grassroots levels as well, and it's something for all parents to note of children they have that go into grassroots clubs. Don't forget about all of the hard work and planning and preparation that goes into putting on any training session of any type, whether that's 8 till 9 on a Tuesday night, or whether that's in a professional capacity from 11 till 1 on a Tuesday morning. An awful lot of work goes in prior to the session from the coaches to ensure that that session looks like it should look, and it gives your child or the player at that club the best possible chance of improving and learning. So just the amount of sheer hard work, planning and preparation that goes into putting on a 2-hour session. You could probably double the amount of time it takes for planning and prep, as you'll know, that goes into a 1 hour, 1.5, 2-hour session. You could probably double that in terms of the amount of time that coach thinks about what it should look like, plans how it should look, and then ultimately goes out and delivers it.
We'll come on to sort of the coaching world shortly in terms of planning sessions. And One thing I'd like to ask is what skills would you say from playing transferred most naturally into being a coach, and was there any skills you had to unlearn?
Yeah, great question. In terms of what skills transferred from playing into coaching and what you need, you have to have a personality that's conducive to communicating. Now, that's not to say that somebody who's quite intrinsically shy can't succeed. They can, of course they can, but you have to have multiple ways of communicating, and if you don't have that skill set, it's going to be ultimately really difficult for you to have the impact on a group of players in any team of any environment at any level, because they're all different. As you know, they all have different ways of learning, different ways of digesting information, and if you aren't flexible enough and versatile enough to impart that knowledge and information on them in different ways to suit the way that they learn and take that information in, then it's going to be hard for you to be a successful coach, I believe. And then the second strand of the question was what, sorry?
Was there any skills that you had to unlearn?
Oh, I've never even thought about that. You put me on the spot there. Really difficult to answer, other than, no, probably just the way that you deliver those messages, because if you're a player, you can still coach. If you're a player, you can still coach. You do coach without knowing you're coaching. If you're a leader by nature, by helping your mate along during a game. But it's just the way you articulate those messages as a player can be a lot more brutal, if you like. You could almost say cynical than it could ever be as a coach, because in and amongst the chaos of a game, sometimes your emotions can lead to you advising, in inverted commas, a teammate of yours to do something better. Whereas as a coach, as we all know, you've got to be a lot more articulate, a lot more controlled, and a lot more productive with the way that you deliver that message. So just probably that, the way that you would communicate the same message ultimately as a coach versus as you would as a player out on the pitch alongside your teammate are totally different.
Brilliant, thank you. In terms of your coaching philosophy, before we tap onto that, would you say that there's any experience that have shaped your philosophy in the way that you coach at the minute?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really lucky that I've learned both as a player, as a schoolboy, a scholar, and a professional, and then as a coach from many really, really good coaches who are working and have worked really high up in the game. Too many to mention. The two that stick out are obviously Dario Gradi and Steve Holland at Crewe. Steve, as we all know now, assistant manager at Manchester United, was likewise the assistant manager for lots of top managers at Chelsea, and was the assistant manager for England under Gareth Southgate. So I was extremely lucky to be able to learn off him for so many years. To talk about Dario Gradi, as good as anybody in terms of player development, in terms of what this country's produced. And other managers that I've worked with as an assistant since have given me different skill sets, provided me with different ways of thinking, if you like, and then it's my job and anybody's job that goes through a career in professional football as a coach and a manager to try and then decide which bits you want to take and which bits you want to perhaps not use because that isn't consistent with your philosophy and your way of thinking. So yeah, I've been really lucky in terms of the amount of information I've been able to learn off the back of lots of different individuals across the years in different environments at different clubs.
So in terms of your sort of core coaching philosophy now, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but would that almost be, it depends on the people that you're working with, and is that a skill for you as a coach now to understand your environment and apply that in the right way? 100%,
yeah. You'd think we'd teed this up before, but you've actually almost answered the question yourself. That's exactly the way I see it. I had a long time from the age of 12 to 41, being a schoolboy, a scholar, a coach, an assistant manager and a manager at one club. So that's a unique experience. And throughout that time, perhaps even more uniquely, the philosophy of that club never changed during that whole period. you could argue that it's the one club in the country that's been the most stable in terms of philosophy, Crewe Alexandra, over the years, that you could possibly ask for. And that was great in terms of there was consistency and alignment, and you became an expert, if you like, in one way of working. But then I've been lucky enough on my journey since at Stoke and now at Wycombe to have worked under lots of managers in a short period of time at Stoke, it's fair to say. And then another manager now I'm really enjoying working with at Wycombe, and Michael Dove, who have had different experiences and view the game completely differently to one another in various guises. So it's a case of, one size doesn't fit all, and it is very much from club to club that will determine, and player to player and squad to squad, that will determine the way in which you coach and the philosophy which you carry forward.
There's a question I've got that's just come to me there, is that you have been an assistant, you've been a manager. How do you be an effective assistant without stepping on the manager's toes, but also challenging and supporting the ideas without going off piste, if that makes sense?
Yeah,
I probably worded that question really wrong. But how do you support the manager with your ideas without going against theirs?
First of all, you have to be aligned. If you're not aligned, then that will cause difficulties, because ultimately, if you don't believe in a way of working in any industry, not just football, then ultimately it's going to be difficult, isn't it, for you to work to your capacity. With all the managers that I've worked with, there's been an understanding from me that the way they want to work is a positive way of working. I've been on board with it because I realise that there's more than one way to skin a cat in football, particularly the way it's evolving now, and there's so many different opinions on how it should be played, whereas it was different in the 80s and 90s when we were growing up. Everything was 4-4-2. Pitches weren't great, so you play from back to front. So there wasn't a demand for a certain style and formation to be utilised. Social media wasn't in effect, so opinions were not obviously out there from supporters and the press as freely as they are now. So with that comes now, in this current day and age, lots and lots of different ways and means to play the game of football. So you have to be flexible enough to be on board and, as I say, aligned with what that manager at the time you're working with feels is going to be best for that team moving forward. And, I've been fortunate enough across the board with all of them where I've seen quite vividly and clearly exactly how they want it to look and been on board with it. Yeah. And what you've got to then do is add your bits and pieces alongside that to supplement that style of play and that philosophy. Now, you might not always agree, but it's important that you do have a voice, because ultimately, if you all share exactly the same opinion on all elements of the way that a coaching session should look or a game plan should look, then you're not going to have the versatility and the adaptability to succeed, in my opinion.
I suppose, in my opinion, is that you bought in for your skill set, and aligning with a manager would be almost not a shoe-in, but they've clearly brought you in and got you under their sort of tutelage for your skill set. And again, I think I'm just speaking from experience, you'd rather a truth teller than a storyteller. And I think as a coach, it's, as you mentioned there, to have your voice and opinions, but also when you walk out of that door, you are aligned in what's going to happen in that session or game plan. Yeah,
well, I've had it both ways, to be honest, Martin, in terms of, if you take the case at Stoke with Alex Neil, Alex brought me in, so we always knew we were going to be aligned. Likewise with Michael Duff at Wycombe, Michael brought me in, so we always knew that we were going to be broadly aligned with the way we see the game and how we want to take the team forward. Whereas obviously the managers that followed after Alex Neil at Stoke that I worked under, they inherited me as a coach. So that's a little bit different in terms of you have to learn their ways and means. Yeah. But that comes with experience. I was fortunate at that point where I'd had a long time as a coach. So therefore, I was able to conform quite comfortably to the way they wanted me to work to aid and benefit them moving forward.
I think, again, it's a great insight for people that are listening, is that you might be in a role, and again, you might be inherited as the words that you used, and how do you continue to support that club and that manager to do the best for the team?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you go about building trust and relationships with players in a dressing room, Al? What would you say is the most important attribute as a coach for that?
I think the biggest two are honesty. If you're not honest in any walk of life, let alone football, it's transferable from every industry, really. Football's not unique in the sense that question could have the same answer in any industry, whether it's in an office, a factory, or out on the ground in a football environment. You have to be honest, because everybody values honesty, because without that honesty, I don't think you can develop any sort of strength in any sort of relationship. And the second thing is they have to know that you are going to contribute towards them getting better. At heart, there are many things that motivate a footballer: 3 points, money, promotions, days off. Yeah. But they also value, and they get a bad rep, but they also value at heart, as much as anything, getting better and improving, because they know all of the aforementioned things that I've just mentioned to you are linked to them getting better, because the better they get, the higher level they can play at, and all those things, financial and success-wise, can start to grow and be reinforced. So they need to know that you are capable of making them better as an individual, and are you invested in making them better as an individual. And if they believe that you can do that, and you've got honesty alongside that, I think those are probably the two biggest characteristics that seal any sort of rapport you have with a player.
Thank you. I think this one's a bit of a long-winded question, really, is with the rise of social media and opinions and sort of content that is readily available at the click of a button, what would you say is more important to developing players at the minute, tactical information or man management?
For me, most definitely man management and the way that you communicate with them. Yeah, because you can have all the tactical information in the world available and ready to impart on them, but if they don't want to listen to you because they don't, going back to the last question, trust you and believe in you as a coach or a manager, and there isn't that relationship there that's been sealed and cemented, then they're not going to digest that information anyway. So all the knowledge that you may have tactically and technically can only really have an impact if the man management skills are already there from you as an individual. So yeah, I would say that is the most important element that you have to have as a coach or a manager before you can even contemplate then ensuring that those messages that you may have for them tactically have the impact that everybody needs.
Would you agree with maybe what Klopp said a few years back in terms of person first, player second? Getting the buy-in
absolutely.
From that side?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, because the player is a direct consequence of the person, isn't it? I think you can never have it the other way around. The person isn't shaped by the player. That player's shaped by the person they are. So if you don't get to know them as a person and you don't get to understand what motivates them intrinsically, extrinsically, then how can you move forward in terms of having a plan for how you're going to develop them and improve them as a player? I think ultimately there's a linear line from that start point, which is getting to know them away from the football pitch as a person, to then obviously, accelerating and increasing their improvement as a player on the pitch. So yeah, absolutely person before player, and if Klopp says that, then we'll go with that, because he seems to know what he's talking about. He's had plenty of success over the years.
Thank you. We alluded to it right at the start in terms of football probably looks a little bit different now to what it is there. What would you say has been the biggest change since you sort of entered the game as a coach?
I would certainly say the focus on tactical elements of the game, most definitely. And I love the tactical area of the game. I think it's probably the area that interests me the most. However, I don't think the tactical element of the game will shape a scoreline as much as making sure that you do the basics well. So always double down on ensuring that an individual, and ultimately off the back of that collectively as a team, they're doing the basics well. That shapes everything that then follows tactically and technically. So ensuring that you run around and compete and win your duels, and you are ensuring that you are focusing on all of the roles and responsibilities that your coach gives you out of possession as well as in possession. And once you've nailed that down, I think that is a byproduct then that your tactical understanding of the game will start to be shaped and improve. Because games of football ultimately are won in both boxes. The performance is determined between both boxes, but the results are always determined by what happens in both boxes. And that's less tactical and more about mindset and more about doing the basics, whereas the performance, which is between both boxes, that is shaped more by tactics because you're playing in a bigger area of the pitch, and therefore tactics do have more of an impact and more of an effect and influence on how the game looks in those areas of the pitch. But the outcome of the game, as I keep saying, and the result of the game is determined in both boxes, and that's all about doing the basics well at both ends. So yeah, I think those are probably the key areas in answer to your question.
I think with the rise of sort of analytics, and obviously I'm talking more so the grassroots game now, we're seeing grassroots players wearing GPS vests being VO'd, we're talking about data with playmakers, so there's so much data out there. What role do you think data and analytics has had in terms of decision making, and has it also almost taken away players' decision making processes by a tactical rise in information?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is far too much focus now on patterns of play, particularly at grassroots level, particularly in that area of the game. Obviously, it's really important at professional level where livelihoods are at stake, and promotions and relegations are at stake. But I think we're taking away the innocence of the game and the freedom that we give players, and giving them that opportunity to show individual intuition on the ball and away from the ball by bringing too much focus into the analytics of the game with them. Just let them play. Just let them express themselves. Let them utilise their own individual skill sets and see where it takes them and see where it takes the team as a direct consequence of that, because you don't see enough individual 1v1 play now in wide areas of the pitch. It's all about wide triangles and working in pairs to try and, progress the ball up the pitch. That's fine, and there is a need for that, of course there is, but I think a lot of the data and the metrics and the analytics side to the game now is levied towards patterns of play and keeping the ball and progressing the ball as a team, and you lose the individual element from it, something that was far more valued, I feel, 15, 20 years ago than it is now. But it'll come back around, hopefully, because the way a football game looks is shaped by all sorts of things. And it shouldn't just be about patterns of play, as I say, and the way you advance the ball up the pitch as a collective. Let's rely on individuals being ball carriers, producing tricks in the final third, going past their opponent, getting to the byline. So entering the box through individual play and not just through combination play.
Yeah. Do you think then the pathway from grassroots to professional football is now harder or easier currently?
Really good question. I mean, it's certainly easier in terms of opportunity, I believe, because academies now have become far more professional and structured than they ever were when Centre of Excellencies were obviously in operation. And with that comes multiple squads at younger age groups, doesn't there? And the big clubs carry 2 or 3 squads, don't they? Not just one. So there are more openings, if you like, in terms of sheer numbers of players needed to fulfil an academy age group across the country at every club that carries an academy. But I don't think it's become any easier as a direct consequence of that to then come out of the system, become a professional. I don't think that's changed and never will. That's always been pretty stable in terms of there's always been 92 Football League clubs, and there's only ever been 11 that can start a game of football. So it's always going to remain largely consistent in terms of it'll be difficult to ever become a professional footballer because it's a hugely competitive industry and it's the most popular sport in this country, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of players at every age group that want to become a professional footballer. So the accessibility and the opportunity to experience academy football is greater because of all the factors I mentioned, but ultimately to then gain a career out of it is as difficult as it's ever been.
Looking back on your journey from grassroots to the professional game, what would you say that you're most proud of?
From a professional point of view, as a player, and a professional point of view as a coach, totally different things really that satisfied me in terms of the way that my career's developed. From a playing point of view, it was great to attain professional status, and at the same time equally as disappointing that injury curtailed my opportunity to see how far it'd take me. I'll never know in that sense because obviously I had to finish it at 22 and I was at a club that was, renowned for and still is giving players the opportunity to carve out a career. I don't know whether that career would have been as a League One player or a League Two player or lower. It certainly wouldn't have been as a Championship player, I don't think. But that's all neither here nor there, and ultimately that disappointment then allowed me to create and forge a coaching career earlier than most. And I definitely wouldn't have had the experiences I've had so far up until this point I'd like to think still a relatively young age at 43, had I not started my coaching career at the age of 21, 22 when I was thinking of a career beyond playing. As we spoke about earlier, I think the biggest satisfaction from a coaching career isn't the successes I've had personally from coaching through to managing and working at a really good level with some outstanding managers. It's probably the impact I've hopefully had on players myself as a coach that are now doing extremely well, not just in the Football League, but players that will have coached 10 years ago that are now 28, 29 playing at Evo Stick League level or Midland Alliance level.
Still in the game.
Still in the game because hopefully I played a small part in them, having an enduring love for the game that's still keeping them playing now at that level.
And it's quite, I've got a little bit of goosebumps there, but looking back on saying the impact that Ray Machin had with yourself, like there's probably people out there now speaking of the impact that you had on them and then the influence that they're going to have on the next generation. So I think for any coaches listening out there, don't almost underestimate the impact that you can have on players.
Yeah.
Or people, on people and how that could maybe shape the future of the game.
Yeah, I think so. And like going back to what we're on now, Wednesday, Sunday, 3 days ago, two grandparents came up to me. My lad was playing a rugby game on Sunday at Crewe and Nantwich Rugby Club for Sandbach, and they came up to me, and I'm not great with remembering faces and names anyway, but I didn't know who they were, and they came up to me like they knew me really well. And he looked at me, the granddad, and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I said, "No, I don't, to be honest, but can you remind me?" And it was Luke Offord's grandparents, who Luke Offord's now playing for MK Dons. Had a really good career, played at Crewe for many, many years, and I coached him from the age of 8. And for his grandparents to remember me and come up to me sort of gave me reinforcement that, yeah, as a coach you do have a real impact on not just the player themselves but their families as well. So I thought that was really nice, and it's obviously been years since I've seen them, and I've aged a lot, I'm sure, since they last saw me, but they still remembered me and came up to me and we had a good chat. So yeah, I think that was quite topical really, that happening on Sunday based on that question as well.
You mentioned in terms, the question we spoke about in terms is it easier or more difficult to break in from grassroots to the professional game? In terms of coaches now, there's a lot more opportunities for coaching, and it's probably seen more as a career now than it was maybe 10, 15 years ago. What advice would you give to any coaches listening in terms of forging that career?
I would certainly think that the best advice has to be time out on the grass. Don't try and accelerate where you want to end up too early, because it'll happen organically. If you plan out where you want to be and when you want to get there, it almost certainly won't happen. So value being out on the grass in your formative years as a coach, coaching as many training sessions as you can, managing or coaching as many games as you can to try and develop all elements of your skill set. I was really lucky at Crewe in that it's a structure and a model there differently to most clubs, in that you coach across multiple age groups throughout your time there. You're not pigeonholed into a certain age group and remain with that age group like at most clubs. So that allows you to deal with children of all ages, all maturity levels, all ability levels, and shapes you and creates experiences and exposure as a coach that are really, really invaluable. So that would be the first thing: time out on the grass. Don't try to accelerate where you want to end up too early. And then secondly, just ensure that you are humble enough to take on information from anyone and everyone that you value. Because however insignificant you might think it is at the time, there might be a little bit of nugget of information that you get from somebody when you least expect it that you might take with you into the remainder of your coaching career. And I'm sure there's been, without me realising it subconsciously, many of those occasions for me that have shaped where I currently stand in terms of and how I coach my philosophy and my sessions and drills.
You've worked across sort of all spectrums of the game. And one thing I'm really interested in is that I think, and this is perception from me, is that a lot of coaches want to get to the 11v11 game very quickly. In terms of coaching youth players or young players versus seniors, is there a difference that you have to sort of apply yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly isn't the way you articulate yourself. You can be a lot more flexible in terms of the way that you communicate with senior players, because they're all at different stages of their life. Some are married, some are not. Some have children, some don't. And the trials and tribulations that life throws at you as an adult is completely different to the trials and tribulations that life throws at you as a young player. So therefore, you have to adjust the way that you communicate to a senior player. Some would need an arm around the shoulder, some would need a rocket, and some would need something in between those two ends of the spectrum. Whereas younger players, generally, you have to approach it pretty much consistently the same all the time. They need that feeling of security. They need that feeling that you care. They need that feeling that you're there to help them. And I don't think you can convey your message to them in any other way other than being quite subtle and soft around the edges. You've got to build up that relationship where they feel, as I say, secure with you being the one coaching them, cajoling them, improving them and developing them. So yeah, there's definitely a different way of approaching a senior player versus a junior player.
You've obviously held roles across the spectrum as well, and we alluded to that earlier. What's the hardest conversation a manager has to have?
The hardest one, I think, is probably the answer that you're expecting, telling somebody that they're not on the team. Now, that becomes easier if that player is expecting it, but ultimately you have to make difficult decisions that will contribute towards you winning a game of football, because that's the be-all and end-all ultimately at senior level. So sometimes you have to tell a player you aren't starting this week, and it'll take them by surprise because they might have played relatively well the week before, so they're not expecting it. So those player-to-player conversations are difficult, but again, they become easier if you've already got a strong rapport with them. So it goes back to knowing the person first before the player and building up that level of trust with them. And if you have that, those conversations become not easy, but easier. So that's probably the hardest conversation that you have. And managing upwards.
Okay.
Managing upwards is difficult because there's stakeholders in the club, owners, directors, sporting directors, that obviously are demanding, and rightly so, of you as a manager or an assistant manager or a coach. because they are determining the success long term of any project by results and where you end up in the league table, and understandably so. So therefore, short-term and long-term demands are constantly there from them. So you have to ensure that you are not just satisfying them, but giving them reason for hope in terms of the fact that you're working towards success as well as gaining it there and then, because you have to give them the bigger picture as well as what's happening on a day-to-day basis, if you like.
I was very fortunate to be an assistant myself to a wonderful head coach, and I think one of the things I've always been interested in is that what are the main differences between being a manager and an assistant manager or assistant head coach, and some of the day-to-day responsibilities that fans or others may not see?
All the things you'd expect, and they all revolve around you have far less time as a manager versus an assistant manager. The media duties are vast. The conversations that you have with stakeholders and directors and owners are they are quite significant in terms of taking up your time, and it's all part of the job. I'm certainly not saying that's something that shouldn't happen. That goes with the territory, and just generally having conversations in and around the building with members of staff, with players, and anybody and everybody who's invested in the club as an employee. It's important that you have those conversations with people constantly, whereas as an assistant manager, a lot of your focus is around the bits and pieces linked to out on the grass and winning a game of football. With a manager, you have those and all of the things that I've just mentioned to contend with on top of it. And before you know it, your day's gone. Yeah. But then you've got a plan for the next day before you leave the building and everything that's going to be thrown at you then. So yeah, there's an awful lot of time that goes into the things that people perhaps won't see, and they only see the product out on the pitch on a Saturday afternoon, not all of the other elements that indirectly contribute towards how that should look.
And that again links in with something we said earlier, is that many don't see what goes into that 1 hour session, and on that. And in terms of that, for those listening, watching in, how do you get a balance of managing your time that is doable for you, and obviously family life and everything else that you've got going on? You mentioned there you've got kids yourself. How hard or easy is it to balance that and get that right?
You'll never get the balance you want. It's impossible. Absolutely impossible. Obviously, gaining a better balance is strongly determined by where you're working geographically. So I've been lucky in that I've only worked for 2 professional clubs prior to Wycombe, and they've been 15 minutes away from where I live, in both Crewe and Stoke. So my work balance alongside my family life has worked quite seamlessly. That's obviously different now because Wycombe is quite a bit far south of where I live, 2.25 hours or more away from where I live. So I don't see as much as the family now. Therefore, you have to be a lot more efficient with the time that you do spend with them, because that time is precious. But luckily, I have a fantastic wife who, in the 18 years plus that we've been together, has obviously grown up with this lifestyle and is aware of it, and is completely understanding of it and has supported me from day one with it. And that goes a long way towards ensuring that you are still able to have, a decent balance between how life should look with the professional demands that you have and the family demands. Because, both of my children play a lot of sport, so they are out of the house a lot at night and at the weekend, and you don't want to miss out on seeing the experiences they're having. So, you have to be very efficient with how you work it. But, if you don't think you can contend with the balance that is required across working and seeing your family, don't take the job. I was comfortable that I could do that because, as I say, the support that I get from my wife in my particular scenario is invaluable, so we make it work.
No, it's brilliant, and I think a shout out to all partners out there that are,
absolutely,
contending with busy professionals such as yourself, and those that are committing themselves to the grassroots game probably 5-6 times a week. It does take a lot of stress and a lot of sort of organisation, certainly if you've got children who participate as well. Before we sort of head into our sort of like last scenario sort of questions, what has football taught you about life?
Another great question, because as we've alluded to a couple of times across some of the questions you've asked, there are skill sets in any industry that are transferable, and football's no different. So football in terms of life has taught me that you do only get out what you put in. Every now and again you can get lucky, but that's the anomaly, that's the outlier. By and large, all the rewards you get from life or football come from the amount of work that you invest in the first place into doing a particular thing, whatever that may be. So football's taught me that success directly comes from hard work, and it doesn't always reward you. But then that leads on to the next characteristic. I think it's taught me perseverance and resilience, because success can look differently for you versus me. But if we're talking purely in a senior environment, success being winning more games than you lose, that won't always be something that will play out, because there are many variables in the game of football that are out of your control as a coach or a manager that will predetermine a result. So you can only do what you can do in terms of controlling the variables that you can control. So then you've got to be resilient and persistent, because every now and again, well, not every now and again, more often than not, that hard work might not be rewarded with success, a promotion. Because unfortunately in our system, at professional level, you've got 24 teams in Championship, League 1, League 2, and only 3 or 4 can go up. 3 in League 1 and the Champ, and 4 in League 2. The other 18, 19, 20 more are left disappointed. So you just got to have that resilience to keep on going and persevering as well. So I think those are the two things: hard work in industry and resilience and perseverance, and the two are linked.
And I think resilience and perseverance, just finally, is hugely an important skill to have with coaches in the industry, because and I'm sure you may be on a similar pathway, but I can share that I've probably applied for over 500 jobs since leaving the army and trying to get into football, and probably only ever having 3-4 interviews. So maybe for any coaches listening, like the perseverance of going, well, just keep trying. It's a heavily top heavy industry with some hugely wonderful coaches involved in it, but again, on the same space, it's getting harder to get in those full-time roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, knowing you personally, I think resilience and perseverance should be something that's on your gravestone, because I think you're the epitome of it in terms of the career that you've forged and created. Martin, you spoke about obviously the setbacks you've had in terms of interviews and not being considered for roles that you are suited to, but you haven't had the opportunity to showcase your reasons for your suitability and viability for the roles. But you've kept going, kept persevering through your love of the game, through your love of obviously coaching and making people better, not just on the pitch and off the pitch. And yeah, I think that really does signify the importance of being resilient and persevering with the ambitions that you have, whether that is in football in our case or whether that is in any other industry.
I appreciate the kind words, and I have to put on record, mate, the admiration I have for you, and you've been an inspiration for me in my journey, doing what you do across multi-roles, and also what many might not know is that you run your own sort of academy as well, that allows many children to enjoy grassroots football in an environment. So yeah, for me,
yeah, big shout out there, because I'm very much, because of my commitments with Wycombe Wanderers, I'm a silent partner in that. Dan Cockclough and Nick Marley, who head that, do some unbelievable work in terms of, like with the experiences you've got with your academy, do some unbelievable work in creating opportunities for players across Staffordshire and beyond to play in an environment where they get high-level coaching, high-level games programme, and are able to live the life of a footballer, if you like, as a junior. So big shout out to those two who do an unbelievable job in terms of running that academy.
No, absolutely, I agree with that. To finish off, we've got some sort of quick fire questions to put you on the spot a little bit. And we've actually just touched on it, but is adversity the best education for coaches?
Yeah, I think so, because you're going to get setbacks, because I've just alluded to previously there are a lot of variables in football that are out of your control, because you're dealing a lot with human error. It's not like in a office or factory environment where if you do A and B, you know you're going to get C. So you've got to deal with setbacks. You've got to deal with the fact that it won't always look like you want it to look. So yeah, absolutely, dealing with adversity, however that looks, is something that you're going to have to expect. It's going to be there for the remainder of your coaching career. So learn to control it, learn to utilise it and harness it in a positive way to make you better moving forward.
What's the biggest misconception around coaching?
Well, that's a really difficult one. Really difficult. The biggest misconception, I think, if it still is, and I think it's softening now, is that you've had to have played to become a good coach. I think that's absolute nonsense, because they're two totally different things. Of course, when you've played and had that experience in a senior environment, which I've been obviously fortunate to have that pathway myself, it does help you to a certain degree in terms of the nuances of coaching with senior players, because there are things that only you can relate to, having been in that environment, like in any industry. But by and large, all the other elements that you need to become a good coach don't have to have been harnessed, don't have to have been created through your experiences of being a player. Absolutely not. They come from other elements of your life and the qualifications and courses that you go on. So I think that's most definitely the biggest misconception. But fortunately, well, I hope that's starting to soften, which means that people who haven't had a career in the game are getting more and more opportunities to become, coaches at the level that they want to get to.
What's the difference between a good coach and a great coach?
I think the difference between a good coach and a great coach is flexibility and versatility. Because if somebody has a particular philosophy that they believe in, that's fine, and they can become outstanding at delivering that philosophy and outstanding at delivering a training session in a particular manner. But with the ever-changing nature of the game, both tactically and in terms of what we're dealing with now with the next generation of, not players, but individuals coming through, and all the challenges that life is throwing at people, not least with social media, you have to be versatile enough and adaptable enough to change that philosophy, particularly the way you coach, not so much the way you see the game, but the way that you coach, for you to succeed and ensure that all 11, all 18, all 25 players in that session, however many they are equally getting as much out of it as one another. So I think adaptability and versatility is probably at the top of the list.
My final question for you today, Alex, is how lonely can coaching or management be?
I think management's probably going to be lonelier per se than coaching, simply because ultimately any sort of outcome or performance falls on the manager's head. So therefore you are exposed and out there, both in terms of the media and the press, and there to be shot at as a direct consequence of you losing a game of football. Less so as a coach, but ultimately when you're out on the grass delivering, you're on your own world, as you know, and you're the one that's directing everything, not just to those players out on the grass, but all the support staff around it at senior level, or all of the parents around the drill at junior level. So therefore you are, for that 20 minutes or an hour or however long delivering, leading a lonely existence where all eyes are on you. So yeah, in different ways, managers and coaches have to deal with being exposed to that, but ultimately it's something you should thrive on, because if you don't thrive on it, then I don't think that it's the industry for you, because it's going to happen.
Yeah,
that's for sure. It's going to happen. You have to deal with it and harness it and use it as a motivational factor rather than something that's going to constrain you, because if that's the way that you view it, then ultimately the best version of you isn't going to be out there out on the grass or out there in the technical area as a manager.
Alex, thank you. I could go on for another hour, but I'm very conscious that you've got a busy schedule, and I just want to say thank you for your insights. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come see us today at Staffordshire FA, and I wish you and all the staff the very best at Wycombe and all other aspects as well.
Cheers, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you.